Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass to the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
And I'm Adam.
Let's get into it. The whole episode.
That would probably hinder the population that signs on, and our audience would suffer from that.
Well, I guess that's fair. All right.
But here we are. We're on another one. We told you we would be back, and here we are.
Here we are. We're not going to be singing Aerosmith to you, so much to your dismay.
You're going to have to look out for the OnlyFans collaboration.
Okay, so
we're
I was
going to take Between Two Clinicians onto OnlyFans.
Is that a Super Bowl?
You're going to...
I'm talking to somebody. I'm like...
You're going to be able to access our...
Yeah, but for a fee. This shit ain't free. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. For $9.99, you can find out about our lives and everything that goes on in them.
Mm-hmm. And we will be wearing clothes, so.
Which is really a lot of cuss words and 24 clients. So
behind the scenes, that's what's going on between us off air. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's let our listeners into our minds.
Well, I think that you brought a total jammer, right? A real one that slaps, as the kids say.
It does.
We're going to be talking about
conflict styles.
That's actually terrible, huh? So, because we're talking about how to argue and argue in conflict, and I guess it's not appropriate to say that one slaps.
It's a banger. It's a hit.
And this is.
These are very
yeah.
It will be
so violent about our words.
It will be an okay, so there's this book that classic me. There's this book I'm reading that explains that even when we're discussing like being intimate with somebody, there is such a difference in the way that men and women describe obtaining whatever the like quote unquote catch would be. I banged, I nailed, I screwed. It's like very procedural, mechanical wordings, and that's not necessarily how we would describe it. And then we give the whole story that he whisked me away and this and that. So sorry for the tangent, but we do describe things quite violently and quite mechanically at times. So there's like a conquest to it.
No, I'll never forget a couple that I was working with that I loved it. Like, and we were talking about challenges in physical intimacy, and it was great to hear her verbalize like a desire to make love and feel connected and physically close. And he's like, yeah, the first time I saw her, I just wanted to smash. I was like, that's probably not how we start that off.
A poet.
Like,
really?
I blame it on Jersey Shore, man. Jersey Shore was the one that brought that into our society.
Yeah. The smush room.
Where like, oh yeah, everyone's smashing. Which, like, that doesn't necessarily sound romantic at all.
Sounds uncomfortable. Like, ooh, yeah. Yeah, so in order to have a good romantic life, I would say couples need to not avoid conflict, but know its purpose. And I teach my couples that the purpose of conflict, it is a form of connection. It's a way of trying to connect, whether it's effective or not aside. Conflict is a form of connection. And knowing that helps you to understand, okay, what need is not getting met right now that I'm choosing to reach for conflict as a tool to connect to my partner, or to express an unmet need, or to share a fear or a dream that's not being honored, rather than saying it outright. Where are these differences coming from? And even the way that male and female brains are structured, they filter criticism quite differently. Criticism lands for us and it motivates us, and criticism lands for men and it makes them defensive. It actually flips on the anger switch. So knowing these conflictual style differences, even just that one as a basic, whether people like to hear it or not, that's the science of it. Talk to the neuroscientists who discovered this. If you want to learn to read people, read their books. Really, it is about learning what triggers you or what activates you and regulates you or calms you, which are two different things, may not do the same for your partner. What the impact is of a certain behavior or motivator is on you might not be the same for your partner. So conflict might have been the way that your family, like I grew up in a loud Italian family, conflict all the time about who cares or who remembers. That was just normal for us. And I remember dating people years ago that they were
Mm-hmm.
like, what? And I'm like, no, that's when we love each other. When we're quiet, it's actually not good. And they're like, what is going on in this household? Like, it's just different cultural differences in connection and communication. And conflict happens to be one of them that many people were not modeled how to do, or even that it occurred
Mm,
growing up, or anytime it did occur, it was really ineffective. And we learn that either as a norm to never have conflict, never in quotes, or this is how couples are. They fight all the time. They use mean words. They cut each other down.
mm,
They storm out. Like all the things that we learn about conflict from our upbringing, I would say we have to unlearn most of them in our adulthood. So that's what we're going to talk
yes.
about today is conflict in adult couple relationships in a romantic sense.
Yeah, and I think that you did really well at outlining the fact that conflict doesn't have to mean that it's inherently a bad thing.
Not
I
at
think
all.
that conflict as a word has gotten like such a negative connotation where like, oh, you know, I'll never, it, it always surprises me when I sit down with new couple clients, and normally one of them at some point in time will come bursting out of the seams with it shouldn't be this difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't be this difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And why is there conflict? Why do we argue? Well, because you're both unique individuals who've made a lifelong decision to do life together. That's crazy. And
Why would you
so,
do that? And you got the government involved? Idiots. No, I'm just kidding.
exactly.
You
Like,
signed
you
government
guys made a contract to live together, knowing that you're unique
and different.
individual people, and then you're kind of confused why it's not working out.
And
Like,
this is true
it,
even in, I know I mentioned the male, the female brain difference. This is true when we see studies even in same sex couples. Couples have conflicts and fights, and whether it's about more like roles that we've slipped into or that we've assigned for ourselves, or it's the very nature of building two lives into one at a baseline that is going to cause
mhm,
conflict. And I'm a linguist, if you will, so I pulled up the definition of conflict, so I'm going to read it for our audience. So conflict as a noun is a serious disagreement or argument, typically a protracted one, which is not the definition I love, a condition in which a person experiences a clash of opposing wishes or needs. Love that one. Or an incompatibility between two or more opinions, principles, or interests. So, as a noun, it makes perfect sense why a conflict would arise
mhm,
between two people who are having opposing needs and wants and who may not
yep,
have the same opinion or interest. That doesn't mean it has to be a conflictual relationship entirely. And how
mhm,
to have conflict when it's a verb makes all the difference. And how much
mm.
you ideally want to respect yourself and your partner once the conflict has concluded also makes a world of difference in how you decide to approach it.
I love the whole definition in the walkthrough
I'm so
because
nerd.
well, no, it's not. It's not a nerd. I sit here and I go like, it's great to know that, but then when we start actually putting in real life applications, like it all falls
Oh
apart,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like
people are cool.
again, I'll say I'm more worried about the couple that comes to me and says I never fight than the one that says we have weekly arguments. Like if you don't have like I would say a little bristle up with your significant other at least weekly, like you're not talking enough.
You're not being real.
Well, I mean, really, we should be able. You cannot have a conversation with someone just randomly and not come to a point where it's like, oh, I don't necessarily agree with that thought process. Now, but if you are continually like, I'm going to suppress that idea, I'm not going to share that idea, then really what happens is the individual you're talking to doesn't know who the hell you are. And that's where we end up when most people move into empty nest syndrome where they're like, oh, we've shared space together for 25, 30, 40 years, but we don't actually know what we think because everything was always a peacekeeping mission. Like, oh, let's focus on the kiddos, let's focus on the
Mhm.
house, let's focus on yada, yada, yada. And I think that something that was really coming to my thought process when you were describing like how men take criticism, men also I feel like internalize criticism as active rejection.
Yeah.
Because what we're hearing you say what we can't do or what is the reason why we're not good enough for you. Now, that is our own stuff to work with, because that's us internalizing stuff we probably shouldn't internalize. But I think that it's also a big part of the discussion of women will get extremely frustrated during conversations with their male partners. And they're like, well, you always seem like you just want to run away, or you're isolating, or you shut down, or you withdraw. And man, when we can actually start isolating, like, well, wait a second, the way that you're communicating to him is telling him that this is something that he cannot do better, that he is a piece of shit per se,
Mm-hmm.
then guess what? Would you want to stay in this conversation? If
No,
he was
criticize.
pinpointing someone else in front of you and saying, you're not her, yes, that you're not her, you don't do these things, you could never do those things, would you feel as apt to be present for that conversation?
No, and when you look at the
And
animal
so
kingdom,
that's why I love talking.
I was going to say, when you look at the animal kingdom, when you feel wounded, especially and humans are animals, you heal alone. Lone wolf is a thing for a
Can we
reason.
agree on that? Can we still agree that humans are animals? I just want to
I
make
don't
sure.
know. It's a species, but it's like the species of mammal. That is what happens. And dogs do this too when they're towards the end of, I'm not calling men dogs or women dogs. That's not what I want to say. But there are people who live in our house. I would consider dogs people, but that's just me. Not in an anthropomorphic sense,
Yeah.
but like I would consider it. Dogs go heal alone because they don't want the loved ones around them to feel hurt by their woundedness, their death, etc.
Mm,
It's not an atypical behavior to retreat when feeling attacked
mm-hmm.
and to gather one's senses and either come back and try to repair or come back and continue the rupture. And another thing, we see that in conflict styles as well, which I don't
Yep.
recommend. I'm not saying that, but if you don't understand that what would if somebody were sitting there, and this is how women's brains work,
Mm,
well, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not this enough, part of our brain goes, so you're saying if I change all those things I could be better and hotter and smarter. It literally filters as like bloop, so I could do those things better.
yeah.
I'm not saying we don't ever internalize and have low self-esteem, like that's part of it too, but it doesn't land the same
Mm-hmm.
way in our brain. It's like a motivator in some way,
Mm,
whether it's to leave that person or to change to be more what they would like, different. But
yep.
for men, it activates defensiveness, which makes sense because you feel emasculated much of the time, I would imagine. I've never been in the body like that, but I would guess because I felt emasculated in my own ways and that type of energy. And
Mm,
then it's going to activate, I need to annihilate this threat. You have now moved from partner to adversary, and I must destroy you, whether that's with
mm-hmm.
verbal conflict or I will take away your attachment to me, I will leave, I will this. And most of the time when that fight or flight mechanism gets flipped on, couples are so flooded
Mm,
they don't realize it and they are fleeing. It's not that they're intentionally sitting there
yep.
sociopathically abandoning their partner. Their body is like, this is not safe. You must leave. Seek safety. And I would ideally like my couples to work towards feelings of safety within the domain of partnership and also honor, verbalize, I don't want to abandon you. This is like late stage treatment. Like, I don't want to abandon you. I need space.
Mm,
This is too much for me to deal with. I'm going to become somebody I don't want to
yes.
be. I need space. And then take the space and come back when you've agreed upon. That alone is one conflict intervention that you can start utilizing
Mm.
rather than perpetuating. They always leave. They always storm out. They always this. Well, if you accuse them of it, and my partner said this too, he's like, if you accuse me of something, I'm going to do it. Like, why would I spend energy convincing you I'm something I'm not if you have it so
It's
well?
almost like a double dog dare.
Yeah. And
Like,
I'm
from a
saying,
male side, we're like, all right, then fine. Like, and it's like, this doesn't benefit either one of us.
no,
Neither
exactly.
one of us is having fun. But we're like, okay, well, if I am a giant turd, let me be the best
Yeah.
turd possible.
Yeah. You want to tell me
And
I'm
I'm
that?
not saying that that's an excuse, right?
No.
Or permission to do that. But that's when we start communicating solely out of hurts, then all we can do is hurt each other.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
No moving past that.
my way that I've always turned it into like a metaphor for clients is I've said, like, imagine two Edward Scissorhands, and that's you guys fighting.
Mhm.
Everything that you're going to touch is going to bleed. And in reality, you are craving each other's affection, attention, and touch. but you're actively in the processes of killing each other while you're trying to do it.
Yeah.
And I think this is why it's really important to like make that transition into what you were talking before we hopped onto the podcast of like understanding how we argue and what those argument styles look like and what are we actually saying versus what am I hearing from my spouse or significant other.
There's a big difference in the filter, and 3 books that These Are the Hills I Will Die On, are Messages by Matthew McKay. I think I have it somewhere here. I will grab it in a second. Oh, yes. Look at me in my home library. Watch me knock over every single book. Wait for it.
Of course. It's always on the bottom, right?
It actually was. Okay, so I have this one, which one of my friend's dogs, while it was a puppy, chewed on the corner, which is still my favorite book. Okay, so Messages with a big cover. It's a communication skills book, and it explains differences between culture and gender, fair fighting, assertiveness training, transactional analysis. Very helpful book. And then Female Brain by Dr. Lou Brizendine, my hero, and she also wrote The Male Brain. Those two.
You mean they have a book on you guys? They finally did it?
They finally did it, and it's so thorough, and it explains everything that many couples, including what we see with same-sex couples, there's certain drives in the beginnings of relationships when couples get together that there's certain parts of the brain that get activated and they will be oriented towards whatever sex you're interested in, is the way that I could summarize it. So it's not about like there's this dichotomy and this huge difference. There are differences. We're still both humans. However, you have to honor those subtle differences and what they're oriented toward. So when you're in a relationship and you want to learn more about your partner, look to their upbringing, look to their family of origin. And I'm not saying don't have questions about it, but observe on a baseline level. What messages are they operating from on a day-to-day basis in life? And then work backwards from there, because like we joke on the podcast, ideally you were not raised in the same household as your partner. Hopefully.
No.
This is not the podcast.
Unless you're from Alabama. But other than that, not, I mean.
Yeah. Please be curious about your partner's experience with that. What if I grew up, my parents fought, whatever, I can say it. What if I grew up and my partner was like, oh, they never fought, ever. I had a friend once, she's like, oh, I love him so much. They ended up getting married. To be whatever. They got married and she's like, I loved him so much. His parents never fought. And I was like, that's not making the case you think it's making, but good for you. Like, that's not a good sign that the person never fought. That shows either they're not compatible romantically, which they're very good at raising kids, but like there's no sense of conflict to like grow them, or they did it all behind closed doors, which still again doesn't model healthy conflict for kids, or they never really fought at all because they didn't care enough to like have that growth in the romantic sense, or they were taught maybe never have conflict. You can't do it. It means that you're going to get a divorce or break up. So they just avoided it like the plague.
Yeah. Normally what you find with those really silent type relationships is that there has been a position where one significant other has just always been the one that has sacrificed or given in different things. So they sort of become a complementary position to the primary voice of the relationship. And I won't lie. I mean, in the past, the patriarch could be something that was toxic, and you did have those things that were existing. Now, not every patriarchy is that, but there was like women who moved into a very subservient role. And again, I would sit back and go, well, is that the relationship you're looking for? Because as long as you're willing to agree with everything that he says, then sure, you could have the relationship his parents have. Now, what was that like for me to say that? And what did you feel when you're like, well, no, I wanted my own relationship, not what his parents had? Well, you're essentially saying that because they never fought, well, you'll accept whatever they had as a relationship.
Bingo. And so many couples don't spend enough time. Maybe after listening to this or other podcasts, I think for a long time, so many couples didn't spend enough time being curious about what they will or won't tolerate. And they were so excited to just be in a relationship or be married. That was enough. They're like, everything will just fall into place. What? How? No, definitely not. You have to study that to make sure it works effectively in terms of like different styles and different ways your partner responds well to you, even just being a person.
Mm,
When I bring things up like this or at a certain timing, and that's part of what I actually had tabbed for today is like the unfair fighting styles, which you and I am sure see all
mm,
the time, at least at the book details, is one of them is bad timing, which I've talked about
mm,
so much. Like timing is everything when it comes to preventing conflict from turning into a blow up.
mm-hmm,
Blaming, so taking the stance immediately, I'm
mm,
right, you're wrong. Too many issues, which I also have learned from other research. Issues is not the best word for it. It's problems because problems have solutions. And even the male and
yeah,
female brain differences of hearing those words.
mm,
Love issues because they're ongoing and we can solve them and talk and chat and blah, blah, blah. And that's not necessarily how the male brain, again, this is an
mm-hmm,
overarching stereotype, but that's not necessarily how the male brain or highly saturated in testosterone brain wants to talk about it. What's the solution? How many couples do you see get in a fight? I just want to talk about my feelings, and all he does is try and fix it. That's because of the issues versus
Well, I
problems.
mean, come on, you've got the video on your website. It's
No,
not about the nail.
I
Like
know.
that is a huge part of, well, wait a second. Let's step back and actually let's break this apart. Essentially, in some instances, and again, we're being stereotypical here, but let's just go with what we got in front of us. So when you're saying like, well, all he wants to do is fix my issues. And what's interesting is like I like to move in sort of devil's advocate in that moment and be like, well, what would it be like for you to actually let him solve some of the conflict or frustrations you have? And
Well, no, then I can't be
well,
mad
that's
at
not what I want him to do. Well, well, then what is he supposed to do?
you. Just be there like a
Like,
girlfriend
well,
would be.
he exactly. Now you just opened the door for me. Thank you.
You're
Now
welcome.
that is the same woman that ends up 2 or 3 years down the road being extremely frustrated with who she has as a husband because now he's no longer the lumberjack. And it's
Yeah.
like, wait a second. You told him what you wanted. He gave that to
Now
you.
you don't want
And
it.
now not only have you emasculated him,
Yep.
but now you're like, you're signing up on Tinder
Yep. Yeah, you're
to
blaming him.
like, oh, I need a real man.
Yeah, no, until you
When the hell did I become Pinocchio?
yeah, when you can't no. And this is also one of the pitfalls and downfalls with expectations and assumptions. I almost lost my breath. I got so excited. This is one of the pitfalls with expectations and assumptions that our partner is exactly like us, even if we are in a same sex relationship.
Mm,
They are not. They have unique experiences that have acted upon them that create different thought processes that, again, please be curious about. But especially with heteronormative couples, this is a pitfall. Well, he can be my best friend, my soulmate, my confidant, my this, my that, whatever Valentine's Day cards that you want to look at. To a degree, yes, friendship is absolutely important as a foundation. You should respect your partner as a human being for sure, like
mhm,
no question. The way, though, that you approach the partner should not be the way that you would approach a girlfriend or a gal pal or chatting or this or that. And so many couples I've worked with are like, well, it was like that in the beginning. Yes, in the courtship phase when both of you had much different neurotransmitter levels happening because that's the way that the
mm,
relationship functioned and you wanted to be intimate with one another. So in a way, it's manipulative on both of your ends to assume that it would have stayed that way forever, given the fact that you wanted to have certain goals met, wink, wink, in the beginning. Yes, somebody is going to be
yeah.
far more likely to want to go shopping with you or hear about your day or whatever else. And then once you settle into
Mm,
different phases of the relationship and your past limerence, it's not as interesting to do that. And it's emasculating in some ways. Like
yeah.
lead with the point, and I would be almost guarantee more people would want to listen to it rather than just these droning details. I 10 out of 10 husbands that and male partners I talk to say that it either is so annoying because they don't know what the point of the story is, so they tune out, then get yelled at for tuning out, and or their mom, sister, whomever female family member used to do that. So it's activating on an analytic level and on a
Hmm.
functional structural level. They tune out, not realize women don't realize how much power they have with leading with the point and then telling the details after. It's really just about, again, good timing and the structure of what you're sharing, the structure of the disclosure.
Boom. Holy cow. Dropping some major puzzle pieces right now. But what's crazy though is like you just said, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a confidant? Or are you looking for your girlfriend. And I think it's the same way, where like I've sat down with men where like one of my favorite couple styles to work with is alpha females,
Me
because
too. Talking, right?
I I absolutely adore like really the attempts of like building good relationships and then communicating, right? But what's crazy is like when you're in an alpha female relationship with another male, a lot of times the male will start to he'll feel intimidated because she'll talk to him like his friends would talk to him.
Uh,
Like, stop being a little bitch. Or like fucking man up and do it. And like what's crazy is that language is not necessarily exclusive to what she would utilize around other people, but then men will internalize it completely different, right?
yep.
So men will sit there and be like, oh well, she doesn't want me to be emotional, like if you know. Or the thing that got me is I was working with this couple, and while she was definitely an alpha female, she could also definitely go into just healthy feminism. Like she could be emotional, she could be teary. What's funny is they were sitting there watching a movie, and it was like it was Marley and Me, and so like he teared up at the moment of the dog being put down, because he was like, man, that so well encapsulated like all the family animals that I had put down for our family, of like, yeah, I trusted you with my family and you did well and thank you. And so he got weepy, and she just responded like, god damn, it's fucking dusty in here, like, and looked over at him and was like, oh, you better not be crying, ha ha. But he internalized it. Like he
Mm,
was like, oh, I'm not allowed to do those things.
yeah.
And what was interesting is when this fell out in a session that we had later on, because I was like, why do I just called it out? I'm very confrontational in what I do as a therapist or as a coach, but I called it out and I said, man, I just feel such resistance from you to become emotional in these moments that we do in joint sessions where it would completely be appropriate. And he dropped that process out in front of her, and she said, oh, I thought I was just we love to do sarcasm. He's like, no, I took that as like I couldn't
Oh.
do that anymore. And you're like, oh. So the distance that you're feeling is him feeling like he's protecting you. Oh, she wants some hard ass dude. I can't be this. I can't take these roles. And
Mhm.
that's the trouble when we don't learn how to adequately sort of articulate what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, what we would want to say.
Mhm.
Like, how powerful would have it been for her to look over and be like, I'm glad we're both crying at
Yeah.
this. That would
Yeah.
have been a completely different invitation than like, you better not be crying.
Yeah. I am actually the receiving partner of that, where he'll look over and be like, why are you crying? And I'm like, in mid tears, I'm like, you know, that's not the language to use because it's very triggering when I'm trying to therapize in the moment. And I'm like, don't accuse me of it. Just be gentle and curious. So then he'll like change it. He's like, what's going on to make you cry? Like, I'm trying to coach him through it. And he's just like, I just don't get it sometimes. And his level of knowledge, and like he played professional sports, his level of knowledge with that, through the roof. I have no clue. My level of knowledge with emotions, through the roof. He doesn't have no clue, but
Mm-hmm.
he's learning about it. And there are many times where, because I've gone through so much therapy and I'm so comfortable with my emotions and I love crying and I love expressing
Yeah.
myself, that he's like, and he shared before, generally, and I've talked to like my brother and other guys about this. It's not
Yeah.
like I don't care. I obviously care. I don't always know what caused it or what solution to give or how to handle it. So
Mm,
sometimes I'll get overwhelmed, and that's why I ask. Like, I'm like, okay, surveying the group, that makes sense. So then there are times where I'm like, you don't need to tend to me. I'm all good. It's a me thing. We're so good. And he's like, okay.
yeah.
So learning even how to coach yourself through that is
Mm,
discussed with your partner. And to your point, those archetypes, if we have those expectations or assumptions and we never verify them, that's going to lead to unnecessary conflict too. I've done numerous posts on that as well. Yeah.
so where do you feel like we've done a great job at like bringing up different awarenesses, but like where do we work into like the actionability of it?
So I have some steps of how to fight fair. So I will give everybody the script before negotiation. So okay, the unfair fighting styles that everybody needs to stop using. We'll do a review.
Mm,
bad timing, blaming, too many issues, covering other feelings with anger, creating impossible demands like vague, abstract concepts like be more considerate or stop being so picky. They really are impossible demands because they require the other person to read your mind at all times or judge if what they are about to
Mm.
do is sufficiently considerate or overly picky. Demanding global changes in attitude or feelings never works. People just don't change their personalities that quickly. And this is not only with romantic couples, it's like child too. Threats and ultimatums, don't
Yeah.
use them. And escalation is the last one they list. And a lot of this would be like unhappy endings that often end in violence, withdrawal, or tears and apologies. They're not mutually satisfactory solutions. It's just a temporary ceasefire till the next round. So instead, I would like to introduce the concept of fair fighting, which are frank, open discussions of differences without shouting or violence. It follows strict rules to keep the exchange fair and peaceful, and ideally a fair fight ends by reaching a mutually agreeable solution. The fighting fair concept springs from three key attitudes: that conflict is inevitable. Well, look at us, which we already talked about. Partners in intimate relationships always want different things. There's no avoiding it, and it's okay. You need to acknowledge that each of you is an individual with your own needs, desires, opinions, tastes, preferences, fears, and goals. Already off to a good start. This is why I love this book. Our needs are equally valid. Also a brand new concept for many couples. We both want things that are natural, reasonable, and understandable. Just because we want different things doesn't mean that one's needs are more significant or important than the others. Your need for rest and privacy is just as important as my need for entertainment and companionship. The third attitude to uphold is that we can both win. When working together, we will come up with compromised solutions to our problems, and we can each get a good measure of what we want without depriving or taking advantage of the other. So the rules, and this I want my couples to follow as well, and I adhere to it to the best of my abilities, would be to set a time. So schedule it ahead of time and not making it daunting, but explain I would like to discuss, even if you say one, I would recommend one, not multiple choice, but like one or two if they're very related topics. This is what I would like to talk about. I believe it will take about 10 to 15 minutes. Would this evening work for you? No, this evening won't work for me, but this time would. Okay, great. You might not get it when you want it. You might not get what you want. State the problem. So say what you or your partner does or doesn't do that you don't like, but being descriptive of the facts, not blaming them. So sharing what the experience is like rather than blame. Stick to one issue. You can only solve one problem at a time. That is what we often learn as well. Express the full range of feelings using I statements, such as I feel mad rather than you make me mad. And do not dump your feelings, which is when you raise your voice, blame, or make threats when you're angry. And it can feel like an emotional attack. So that's not what you want to do. Express the full range with I statements instead. Propose a change that is very specific and consider the other person. So instead of it being global, you would state it in behavioral terms rather than I want you to be more considerate. I would like you to come in right away when I say it's time for dinner and talk to me at the table instead of reading the newspaper, because that is actually specific. And this is where the other book, the Female Brain, comes in. We speak in generalities and desires that will, and this is the psychoanalytic episode that we did a while ago, you will omnisciently know us and that you will know what we're saying without us having to explicitly ask for it. Because as a woman, especially if we have to explicitly ask for something and we don't have a comfort level with assertiveness, the risk that the need goes unmet, which means you don't like me, which back in the day meant I would die, the feeling that felt sense goes up. So I'd rather be general. And the way that I linguistically discuss with girlfriends, and one of the examples given is like, oh, my feet are cold, or, oh, it's cold in here. Oh, it's warm in here. And guys are like, yeah. And we're looking at them like, open the window, close the window.
You know, that one hits a little too close to home. I got a wife in the third trimester.
Well, I'm aware,
So it's one or the other right now. And it's a constant conversation. And like it was hysterical because
pads, cooling ice.
Like, no, it's like it's hysterical because like yesterday was my birthday. So she's a baker, right? So she loves to bake for my birthday, right? And so I said, no, babe, you're pregnant. You don't have to bake this year. Don't worry about it. And she's like, no. I'm baking your favorite cake. I'm going to do it. And I was just like, oh, well, I love my birthday cake. And so then it was like about 45 minutes into the whole process. She's just like, God, it's so hot in here. And like, oh, I wish I didn't have to do this right now. I'm like, I am so sorry that my birthday is just inconveniently placed.
Yeah.
Where but that's the truth.
Yeah.
It's funny because men can be so dense in this, and I find it all the time where you guys are dropping hints of like where you're at, and we're like, I don't know what she's. It's
Yeah.
so hard to read them. They're like, I'm cold. Like, God, if only you could tell me what you needed. You're like, I don't know. And you're like, okay, all right, well, eventually we'll get there. And then,
Yeah.
like, pan right, frozen dead. And so, like,
Means she froze in the cold living room.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like that's how she feels sometimes. But
Yeah. This stems though from our childhood experiences with how apt our parents were at, especially in infancy, reading our
mm,
nonverbal cues, which again, as an infant makes sense. You literally
yeah,
do not have verbal and linguistic capabilities in terms of talking like you and I are now to
yep.
ask for things. Cries have to be deciphered and interpreted in
Mm,
order for a need to be met. And in romantic relationships, there's a part of us that goes back to that part of our psyche and
yep.
operates on that assumption in our brain. They should just know. Why don't they think like me? My girlfriend would have known, da 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 da, da, all of these other things that are not accurate. And you must explicitly ask for your
Mm,
needs to be met and tolerate the discomfort and the risk of potential rejection. It is not going to equal death. You must override that part of your brain that is telling you be appeasing, be loving,
mm-hmm,
be kind, be all these things all the time. Otherwise, you'll be alone forever. Which, in some moments of fight, you're like,
mm,
I wish I was alone in this moment. Like, sometimes it's a
yeah.
welcome respite. You operate on these expectations and assumptions of leaving a family system. Let's say, even if it was ineffective communication, whether you liked it or not, if you did live in your household for
Mm,
quite some time, you are operate. Let's say you moved out at 18 or 17 or even 25, it doesn't matter. You're operating on 15 to 25-year long interaction patterns and then expecting and projecting those onto someone you've just
mm,
met. They can't read you that way. You must
no.
explicitly ask numerous times and have the need met numerous times before you can move into the nonverbal, they should just know. If you've told them and they've agreed to it and you've seen it the last 10 times, then yes, they
Mm-hmm.
should just know. And you can follow up with them as such. But those verbal cues of like hints and whatever else, be assertive and direct. I think men, from what it sounds like, would maybe appreciate that more of just saying, hey, my feet are cold. Could you grab my slippers? Rather than like, it's cold in here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Probably.
that's pretty much like I'll break bro code for that. So pretty much that's the thing we hate the most.
Thank
Because
you.
again,
Well,
let's go back to what that person, what that male is probably trying to do in that moment. They have a desire to meet your needs, but you're communicating in a way that they can't
so
fulfill
cryptic.
those needs. And it's like it really is. I don't sit down now. I'm not going to say that I haven't had it. I've had the couples that come in that literally the male is just there for me to give him permission to leave her, and I
Mm,
won't do that. I don't play that game. Like, you guys need to be adults and handle it yourself. But most of the time, when a couple does come in, and if you have your husband or your boyfriend, significant other coming in with you, most likely they're there because they want this thing to work out. They're equally as frustrated, they're equally as concerned, they're equally as worried about losing something that means something to them. So if your male significant other is showing up, trust that his presence alone is better than what some men will give you in words. And so the frustration though is they are begging, like, tell me what to do. And there's this thought process that we sometimes get locked onto that, well, if you won't, like, basically get this out of assumption or inferring it through my previous actions, then I don't want to tell you what it is. And it's
mhm.
like, well, wait a second. I think that's a whole different level of insecurity because you're worried that they're actually going to do that thing. The thing that your whole life that no one has been able to meet this need, no one has seen you for you, no one has come in and rescued you in those moments.
Yeah.
You're afraid this will be the guy. Because if this is the guy that does it, then that fundamentally is going to change the narrative you've been telling yourself your whole life.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
sometimes we're not ready for the narrative to change, and so we continue to utilize the same maladaptive coping skills of the past to just make sure that the prophecy stays true.
Yeah, status quo.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And
That's
it's
such a profound awareness to share because it's so foundationally true for so many people. I tell people you're actually not afraid of things not changing. Like that's what you're already living. It's more about things changing or you not being able to stay the same as you are now. As much as you say you want to make all these
mm,
changes or have these different experiences, it's on the other side of that growth and change that you will meet that version and you might not be ready for that version of yourself or for your partner. What happens when he isn't a deadbeat like everyone else? What happens when she isn't a bitch like everyone else? Who do you have to become to be ready for
hmm
that? And what happens then? That's a huge paradigm shift, and it is related to the conflict styles and the fair fighting, because what's going to happen to your nervous systems when you don't have to fight that other the previous
mm,
way. And I've seen couples where they make remarkable progress and then there's a regression, and remarkable progress and then there's a regression, because their brain is like, no, we don't like them. We spent X amount of years fighting them. They're an adversary. What are you doing getting close to this person who could, or in some cases, like has fought or verbally, like attacked you in a fight in the past? Why
hmm
would your brain or nervous system want to get close to this person? Oh, we're using new rules. Oh, okay. I think I can handle this conflict differently. And then there's no spice, pizzazz, whatever else. And then couples are like, yeah, it's too good. We moved from highly conflictual to highly cordial and kind. And we're still talking about everything. Don't make no mistake. We're very much so more of our authentic self. But we didn't realize how much we were using conflict to connect or as a spark for intimacy. And this is where I was talking about in the beginning. Conflict is a form of connection. Whether you like it or not,
hmm
having conflict causes growth, and it's a form and an attempt at trying to connect with your partner. And it's going to have to be a different catalyst if that's what you were using for intimacy. Many couples fuel those
hmm
very stormy fights because the intimacy afterwards, it's like high highs, low lows, back to high highs,
Oh
agony and
yeah, it's
ecstasy
a
all.
very primal side, right? And that,
Yeah,
but that's, but at the same time, it's extremely toxic
but
in what we're
couples
trying to get
themselves
out of
love
it. Oh, that, yes, I actually want to make the distinction as well that now remember, if I'm also the kid that in my development as a child, I was always in conflict, I was always in trouble, or that most of my attention from my primary influences in my life came from them disciplining me from potential problems, situations, not participating in society as they wanted. Guess what? I'm going to introduce that same thought process and conflict stream into the relationship I have with the next most intimate person. And so, you, if you ever have sat there and you're like, I feel like this guy just wants me to be batshit crazy. Like, do you want me to yell at you? There could very well be a yes in
yeah,
that stream of like, yep, I want you to degrade me. I want you to say these things because that's how I'm used to receiving attention and love and
yeah.
connection and what I believe is intimacy. And
Yes.
so it's funny that you bring that up because I actually, when I sit down with most of my single, like C-suite level
Mhm.
executives who are like in between their 30s and their 50s, most of the guys will talk about. It's funny because many women may not conceptualize it this way, but they've talked about like, man, I'm not really up for the aggressive sex anymore. And it's like, well, please, let's talk about that more. And they're like,
Yeah.
where they want me to be pissed at them. So I will
Mhm.
actually have sex with them harder and faster and all these other things. And they're like, because again, I feel like what I am is I'm just basically a giant flesh tool
Mm,
where I'm being used as the vibrator of choice this evening, but you actually don't want to connect with me. And I don't like being experienced as that person. I don't want to desire to choke you. I don't want to
right.
desire to degrade you. But there's these aspects of like, oh, well, no, we feel something. Well, no, no, no. Just because we feel it doesn't mean that it's good for us. And
Correct.
don't walk me down to like, oh, then he's not kink positive. Dude, I work with kinks all the time. That's not, but
That's
they
fine.
have to have a purpose behind them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kinks that are born out of trauma are not necessarily healthy kinks.
True. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's a recreation of what the original trauma was to try and reclaim power over it. Yeah, that could be a whole other episode for sure. And it's so important to talk about that as a part of the conflict episode, because that is part of some couples' repair cycles, yet they're still trying to enact
Mm-hmm.
or play out what the fight could have been like. So let's say we have a nice repair
Mm,
and we have a conversation, less of a conflictual argument and more of a conversation. And then we arrive at some conclusion. We're like, okay, that felt good. And later on, we're being intimate. I would be
mm-hmm.
so curious to see if for each couple will be different. I'd be so curious to see what the impact of that might be in couples who are repairing in the early stages. Does it get played out later? Is
Mm-hmm.
there some sort of enactment later in the bedroom where there's a power and control dynamic now being sublimated into
Mm-hmm.
intercourse rather than discourse?
Mm. It's, I would say that it definitely seems like, the sad thing that I will say is I feel like whether it was when I was going through to become a CSAT or looking at just like different
Yeah.
healthy sex behaviors or whatnot, there's been this like hijack of what sex is. And I think that sex has been turned into something that's almost like an exercise. It's almost like a power statement. Um, but sex is no longer about like a true exploration of your partner, right? And like physical connection. And I know that some of you are like, well, no, that's how I see it. I'm talking about the unhealthy ways that it's portrayed. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey was the phenomenon it was because of what reasons? It wasn't about connection. It wasn't about love. It was
Yeah.
about power differentials and speaking into different, shadow spots of people's lives. And like,
Mhm.
that's where that is.
Yeah.
Now, you might be thinking like, wow, this episode's swinging wide here, because how did we start with conflict and we ended up with sex? Well, there's a lot of times that conflict in our own life leads us into sexual situations because we use it as that distraction to the discord that's experienced in life. So that's
Yeah.
how we get there. I think the difference is once you actually define what sex is for you in a healthy manner, then you're more apt not to use it as just like the generic tool of the
Mhm.
instant need generator, an instant
Mhm.
gratification generator.
Mhm. And that
I don't know.
the dopaminergic connection, I would say, or the release, especially if couples are using that as a source of, well, now, I know the fights are over when he reaches out and slaps my butt or touches me or initiates sex or vice versa.
Yeah.
This, again, I think we could do a whole other
Mm,
episode on this of what, like, the purpose and utilization of sexual intercourse in romantic relationships. I feel like every episode can be a
mm,
really cool research article, which I love because I'm a nerd. But that is part of the conflict. I would
yeah.
say one of the conflict life cycles is using intimacy and the closest you could ever possibly be
Mm,
to somebody as a way to reach a new baseline homeostasis, whether it's fleeting or not.
mm-hmm.
Well, let's just make up sex. It has its own name.
Yeah, and doesn't that sound so like generic? It's like a box to tick, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
we got in a fight. We said a bunch of stuff that was absolutely volatile, and then we had great sex afterwards.
Love
Like
it.
yeah, but were you with your partner when you were having sex? Or were you in your head thinking about how you were going to manifest this into like your own virtual reality? Like that's when I've been able to unlock couples to realize like you don't have sex with each other. You have sex and both of you flip on a different screen in your minds. Like you have physical interaction, you need the thrust,
Yeah.
but you're not necessarily actually sleeping with him nor are you sleeping with her.
Yeah, it's much different.
And
This
that's like
part of you is
that's
connected.
the mic drop moments that you have of like,
Yeah.
oh, like I guess that actually is, but I'd love to have that discussion because there's actually a few
Cool.
interventions that like I kind of invented for my couples on like, well, no, I do think that there is a need when you have conflict and you have repair. There is some way to physically come together,
Yeah.
but it needs to be organic.
Yes.
And like you need
Yes.
to actually be able to move through like the what I would say would be the stages of vulnerability.
Mhm.
where if you're not actually inviting vulnerability into your sexual interactions with your significant other, we're set up on an unsustainable sort of trajectory, because that's when you go, oh, the spark was lost. The spark wasn't lost, it was just never started in a way that you could actually keep the fire burning.
And that is where we will end the episode for today. Nailed it. Mic drop indeed. Thank you. This was
Exactly.
rousing, not arousing. It was a rousing episode. Be very clear linguistically. And I appreciate your time and your expertise. And I can't wait to do
Absolutely.
the next episode on this topic and this phenomenology. And I'd love to learn more about what you've invented.
You too. Well, thank you all for tuning in, listening to us. We appreciate every one of you that drops in.
Mhm.
If ever, reach out to us. We'd love to have topics that are brought up by the audience, because we know then that's stuff that you want to listen to. So I can be found on Instagram at the Wild Ethos Counseling. And then I forget, like I'm like such in like two minds right now.
Yeah.
I've got like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
I
shut up.
agree. Yeah. Mine is at Talia Bombola, just as it sounds. Hopefully that grammatically makes sense if you sound it out loud. And I do like weekly Q&As. I try to on my Instagram, and then you can also DM us at Between Two Clinicians. We have our own Instagram page. And yeah, I think that's all for now. And we'll see you next time.